This is The Catholic Current with Father Robert Mateig.
You know that organizing life without Christ, now that we've got more than 200 years of that under our belt and we see what a mess we made, I think we need to try something different. What do you think the role of Christianity should be playing in the rebuild of civilization that I think is necessary?
You're right. I think Christianity is compatible with a lot of these American values in ways that this secular leftist religion, which I think it is clearly not.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert Mateig of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. As always, let's start with prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, through the intercession of St. Ignatius Loyola, we ask that you pour forth your Holy Spirit upon us, a spirit of discernment that might hear your voice and obey your command. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Friends, you know that I say very often, I'm not a political partisan. I'm not an apologist for any candidate, party, or platform. Yet we do talk about politics, and we talk about it from the vantage point of promoting and protecting life and liberty. And that's what we're doing on today's show. You'll want to stay with us for the whole hour. The second half, we're going to meet Karoline Leavitt, a young lady who's running for Congress from New Hampshire. My guest right now is a conservative voice. He's a Marine. He's a businessman. He's an author. He made a name for himself with a book called Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and culture in crisis, became a Netflix film. J.D. Vance, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Thank you for having me, Father.
J.D., there are some people who shake their head that they really got burned in the last election cycle, and they think it's just time to walk away from politics and let the chips fall where they may. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think unfortunately, even if people want to walk away from politics, politics may not want to walk away from you. And I think we're learning this, unfortunately, in a very hard way with some of the policies of the Biden administration, I mean, especially for social conservatives, for devout Christians, devout Catholics. And, you know, Father, I'm a Catholic convert. I think that, you know, if you care about whether your children grow up in a society that respects life, if you want your children to go to a school and learn that it's not just okay, but in fact true, that there are biological differences between men and women, these things require our engagement in the political process, because the left has decided to basically institutionalize its worldview here. And I think, you know, in some ways they're coming after the hearts and minds of our kids. They're teaching our children things that we would never teach them at home. And that is their game plan. And if we actually want to have a place in this society, and I think we must have a place in this society, politics is an important avenue to push back. It's, of course, not the only avenue, but it is important to get involved and stay involved. I certainly was disappointed after 2020. I was certainly sad by what happened. I was not pleased who our new government is, but I think we have to keep fighting. And you know, one of the great things about the Christian faith is I think it teaches us that victory is not always on our terms or on our timeline. Sometimes it's on God's, and that's okay. Our job is to keep trying for it.
Well, you know, I agree with that. I think that we live in a culture now that has removed the transcendent, and so politics has become the greatest good. And of course, as a Catholic, neither you nor I can accept that. I also think it would be naive to walk away from the political sphere entirely. Government just has too much power these days, and it really does matter whose hand is on the lever of power. You know, you didn't have to do this. You know, you could have, you know, you're a businessman. You served our country in the Marine Corps. Thank you for your service. You know, you're obviously a very capable writer. Why did you decide to turn your life upside down? You're a family man too. Why did you decide to step into the arena of politics?
Well, you know, a couple of reasons. I mean, one, I've always loved American history, and I think that, you know, sometimes some of the proudest moments in our history are moments where our political leaders have stepped up and done things that are worthwhile and virtuous and of high character. And I look at our political system today, and I frankly see, to use a technical term, a lot of scumbags in our political process. Not everybody, of course, but a lot of them. And I didn't want my kids, and I didn't want myself to think that the only people who did it were people who did it for the wrong reasons. But more directly and more specifically, I guess I just saw a lot of very serious problems in our country. A lot of things that I've cared a lot about. I've written about them. I've talked about them. I go and give speeches about them, and I thought that it was valuable and worthwhile to really go and try to make a difference directly in public service rather than just talk about these things and complain about these things. So really, just an itch to get involved directly, as Teddy Roosevelt might say, to get in the arena as a personal matter. And that's why I decided to pull the trigger and launch this political campaign.
JD, a lot of our listeners are concerned about family life and their family people. It's the center of their lives. If you know anything about human nature and human history, you know that the family is the basic cell, the basic building block of society. And it seems that right now the culture and the state are arrayed against the family, intruding, disintegrating. What do you see when you think about family, and what is the proper role of politics in protecting the family?
Well, I guess I tend to think that the family is being attacked on a couple of different fronts, and one is cultural and one is economic. And the economic piece of this is relatively straightforward, though I think unfortunately politicians of neither party like to talk about it a whole lot, which is that 50, 60 years ago, it was possible in most parts of this country for most people, whatever their education level, to raise a middle-class family on a single income. We had, very good manufacturing jobs. We had a very robustly growing economy.
That's what my parents did. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's increasingly hard for people. So you have a lot of folks who feel sometimes justifiably so like they need a second income. That pushes more and more people into the workforce. Of course, it takes at least one parent away from home for a significant period of time. But I think that's made our families weaker. I also think that, we have lived, I'm 37 years old. I've lived my entire life in a country where we've been taught that the most important value we can pursue as people is the liberation of the individual from social constraints, from obligations, from duties. And I happen to think that true freedom exists when we actually exist in a robust community, when we have shared obligations to one another, and especially when we live in healthy, strong, and stable families. And I both of those things really matter. And there are all of these individual issues. I think the gender ideology that's becoming very in vogue, and not just our colleges, but increasingly our middle schools, our high schools, and God forbid our grade schools. But also, the ubiquitous access to pornography, a lot of the issues that we talk about as Christians. I think that the fundamental end goal is that they make it much harder for normal people to enter into the type of family relationships that produce healthy, flourishing people. That is really what this is ultimately about. Is it confuses us, it distracts us, it introduces temptations, and all of those things I think have led to a weakening of the family to the great detriment of the health of our country.
Friends, we're talking about new voices for protecting life and liberty. Our guest for the first half of the show today is J.D. Vance. He's running for Senate from the state of Ohio. J.D., I am in agreement with you. I grew up in a blue-collar family. My parents didn't go to college. Dad, came home at the end of every day with his black metal lunchbox, and he put it on the kitchen table. And that was the American story for a whole lot of people. That's changed now. And I think one of the reasons that's changed, and not for the better, is that America's manufacturing base has largely evaporated. And there's all sorts of deleterious side effects that come from that. Do you have any plans for how to revive, how to bring back to life America's manufacturing base? Solid blue-collar jobs, honorable work where a person can support his family?
Yeah, well, I think that we have to appreciate that this current condition was produced by a host of, I hate to say it, bipartisan. I'm a Republican, but bipartisan policy decisions that basically traded good middle-class manufacturing jobs for a lot of cheap consumer goods, which I think has made our culture more materialistic and has in some ways been good because we've gotten cheaper goods, but in most ways I think has led to the destruction of those good middle-class manufacturing jobs. And so, I think the first and most obvious thing that we have to do is really unwind the hyper-globalized economy that all of us have basically grown up in, where we've depended so much on other countries to make critical things that we need. I think this has been bad for our self-sufficiency and prosperity, but it's also meant we've lost a lot of middle-class jobs. So I happen to think that we should be penalizing through tariffs and through other means companies that are making things and doing business with regimes like China, instead of building and making things in their own country. And I think, all individual nations have the right to build an economy for themselves that's based around self-sufficiency and the dignity of work. The United States, I think, has unfortunately not done that very well the last 30 or 40 years. And again, most politicians of both parties have been complicit in this. I think another thing that we have to do is we actually have to get back as a culture, and this is where leadership really matters in the rhetoric of our leaders, to respecting people who work with their hands and do things with their hands. There's nothing wrong with, building something or making something or manufacturing something. And yet the message that our culture sends to, I think, most children is, unless you go to college, unless you work in a white collar profession, there's something less good or less admirable about your job. And I think that's exactly backwards. And, there are policies that we built on top of it, an education system that's, I think, encouraged most people to go get a 4-year college degree instead of giving them access to other educational opportunities where they can get better skills. So there's a whole set of policy problems that come along with it. But I think at its core is that we've lost respect for the dignity of hard work and manual work. And unfortunately, you can't build
JD, we're coming up on a break, but I want to take up the thread of that conversation in the next segment. Friends, when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with JD Vance. He's running for Senate for the state of Ohio. We're talking about new voices for life and liberty. Remember, our rallying cry here at the Catholic Current is Christus Mundo, Mundus Christo, bringing Christ to the world and the world to Christ. We do it because our Lord says so, for the greater glory of God, the love of our neighbor, and the salvation of our own soul. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Take this conversation to your family and friends. Together we'll take it around the world. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
You're listening to The Catholic Current with Father Robert Matej from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Stay connected with the show, our guests and topics, by following the show on Twitter and Gab. Just search for The Catholic Current.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert Matej of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. We're talking about new voices defending life and liberty. My guest right now is J.D. Vance. He's running for Senate from the state of Ohio. J.D., in the last segment, we were talking about a shift away from an American culture that honored the laborer, honored the people who worked with their hands, the carpenter, the plumber, the people who got things done. And we have the solution that you'll end up homeless unless you go to college. Now, I spent nearly all of my adult life on university campuses, either as a student or as a professor. I have a great reverence for higher education, but it was really never meant to be for everyone. It was never meant to be backup high school for all the things that you didn't learn in high school. It certainly wasn't meant to be the late adolescent spa. It's become that at a lot of schools. How do we communicate that the simple values of learning how to work hard and provide for your family is an honorable thing, and that we need socially and civilly to support that?
Yeah, well, I think that, so I'll tell you a story just from the campaign trail of a few weeks ago, where I met a woman who's a recovering addict, was, of course, in Ohio, where I'm running for Senate, we have a very bad opioid problem. And she was working a nice job, a manual labor job, but making $18 an hour. She enjoyed it. She talked to me about it. She really clearly was proud of herself and liked what she did. But then she sort of mentioned, I'm thinking about going back to school. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. What would, this woman's probably in her mid-50s. What would motivate her to go back to school? And so I asked her, and she said, I just worry that the job that I'm doing doesn't get any respect. And now that I'm back on my feet, I feel like it might be good to do something that comes with a little more respect. And I thought, how heartbreaking is it that in our society, you have a recovering addict who's doing very good things, who's doing the right stuff, and we send a signal that she's not respected, and that we don't honor the things that she does. And I think a lot of people pick up on that, though they might not put it in exactly those words. I think a lot of people are picking up on that, and it's a very real and serious problem. And so I tend to think that there is a cultural component to this, the rhetoric of our leaders and so forth, but we also have to do a better job of actually ensuring that those who want to enter the skilled trades or want to go and do something that doesn't require a four-year degree should have access to it. Of course, all of our resources and all of our money basically goes to people who want to earn a four-year college degree. I don't think that's good. I think, frankly, it's created a real debt crisis for a lot of our young people.
Yes.
And it's created, I think, a real sense that we don't value and respect people who work with their hands.
I want to talk about small businesses as well. One of the side effects of going to college for 4 years is you spent 4 years and often a lot of money. And I would have a rule that if you can't calculate compound interest, you can't sign for a student loan. But you have someone who spends 4 years, maybe 5.5, 6 years, ends up 6 figures in debt, doesn't have a lot of prospects for paying that off in a reasonable amount of time. So what you've done is you've had someone spend time and money, and he's now not in a position to start a business or start a family. And I think there's something really important about having networks of small businesses in local communities. And our culture and our policies seemed to be aimed against that. Am I reading this right?
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I often think about, say an 18 or 19-year-old who could maybe earn $20, maybe even $30 an hour in a skilled trade. Then you compare that person against a 23-year-old who has been taught to devalue the value of manual labor, but also has maybe $40,000 or $50,000 worth of student debt that they've accumulated over the last 4 or 5 years. And which of those people I think is better prepared to start a family? Which of those people is better prepared for financial independence? Certainly I think the person that did not go to college. And so I do think that in some ways we've started a lot of young people off on a life path where economically and culturally they're discouraged from starting a family, from doing the things that are really important. And, one of the things I really worry about here is that we're becoming a society where there's just fewer and fewer kids being born. And I think that has a very psychologically devastating impact. But, it's a decision that we've made. We've made the decision to prioritize everything over families. We've prioritized certain careers. We've prioritized education. We've prioritized all of these things when of course, I think, those things that really make life worth living are children and families. And they've gotten short shrift from our policymakers the last few decades.
Friends, we're talking about New Voices Protecting Life and Liberty. My guest in this segment is J.D. Vance. He's running for U.S. Senate from the state of Ohio. J.D., let's talk about the life issues. I'm a Catholic priest, worked in medical ethics for many years. A lot of our listeners are Catholic. The life issues are really important. We believe in the sanctity of human life from conception to natural death. Our political betters would suggest that that's a minority position. I don't think so. Where do you stand on the life issues?
Yeah, I'm 100% pro-life, and I, of course, thinking about it primarily in terms of the right of the unborn to have their life, right? And I think that's sort of the most important and most fundamental right that all of us have is the right to live our lives. And of course, we've taken that away from young children because they haven't been born yet. And I think that's a moral tragedy. But I also think, that there's something comparable, between abortion and slavery, and that, while the people who obviously suffer the most are those subjected to it, I think it has this morally distorting effect on the entire society. And I see this, Abraham Lincoln once famously said, "As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master." And I think about this in the context of abortion, where you have a lot of people who I really think they've begun to see children as inconveniences to be discarded instead of blessings to cherish. And obviously sometimes children are unplanned and they come along at unexpected times. I'm the father of 2 with a third on the way. I understand that. But how do we think of those kids? Like how does our society understand them? How do their parents and grandparents understand them? I really think abortion has done something very socially destructive to us as people and how we see the most vulnerable and the most dependent among us. And I think that's one of the underappreciated facts of abortion. It's really distorted our entire society.
Oh, JD, I'm in full agreement with you there. We never ask, what does it do to a person's character to even consider the possibility of killing your own child. What does it do to the soul of a person who, at the end of a workday, literally has to wash the blood of children off of his hands? And I asked when I was teaching medical ethics, I said, are we building a moral house in which we would want to live? If we can justify the murder of any one innocent human person, then no one of us is safe. We're only as safe as the most vulnerable members of our society. And if we can't protect the most vulnerable, then we're all absolutely at risk. You've been running the campaign. You've been traveling around your state. What are you seeing in your state? What are the needs of the people, and what's their morale like? I think it's a difficult time for all Americans, isn't it?
Yeah, I do think that people are maybe switching gears from being a little depressed and a little worried about the future to being more engaged and more energized to do something about it. So that's good, but certainly there's still, I think, a bit of a morale problem. I think that, most of the issues that I hear people talk about are the issues that you would think people are talked about. They're worried about the immigration issue. I think especially, one of the things that happens in Ohio, of course, is you have a lot of drugs coming in when you have, a completely uncontrolled southern border. Certainly concerns about manufacturing jobs and quality of employment. Certainly concerns about, the education system. What are people sending their kids to every morning? What are their kids being taught? What are their kids bringing home? There's just a lot of, I think, the normal daily concerns that people have, and in a sense that it's hard to be a normal, conservative, God-fearing person and to just, live your life. I spoke to a doctor probably 3 or 4 months ago who is starting to really push back against gender reassignment surgeries and hormonal therapies among children in his medical practice. And he's worried he's going to lose his job over it. And I think there's a lot of fear that if you speak up about some of the craziness that's happening in our country, you're eventually going to get fired for it. So it is a tough time for a lot of people. But again, I take some hope in that folks mostly aren't just checking out. They're starting to get re-energized and re-engaged and excited about the future.
JD, if you're elected, what's the first bit of legislation you would like to sponsor?
It's a tough question. I mean, I really do think that both for people on the southern side of our border, but also on the northern side of our border, our own citizens, the immigration crisis is really catastrophic, and we have to get back to some measure of just basic lawfulness, so that you don't have cartels and sex traffickers taking advantage of people on the southern side of the border, and you don't have so many drug overdoses on the northern side of the border. I tend to think that's probably issue number one, and it's a relatively straightforward issue of law enforcement. Longer term, I really do think that the manufacturing and self-sufficiency stuff that we talked about earlier, are we rewarding businesses that are creating jobs locally, and are we frankly punishing businesses that are shipping jobs overseas? I think that has to be a main focus of ours, because unless we're a self-sufficient economy with good middle-class manufacturing jobs, I think we're all going to find ourselves in a much poorer, a much less safe, and just a less happy nation over the long term.
Right. I think that a nation has a right of self-determination, and that starts with control of borders. And if we were taking COVID-19 seriously, if it were as dire a disease as we're told it is, there might be more effort to secure the border. Certainly, if we take the opioid crisis seriously, if we take human traffic seriously, I think that the border is really does have to be job one in the short term and in the long term. JD, we've got about 30 seconds left here. Can you close on a positive note and give the American people a word of hope and encouragement?
Yeah, I think that in some ways the most important step to solving any problem is realizing that we have a problem. And what I'm most optimistic about, that we're not saying the same things that we've been talking about for the past 30 or 40 years. Like, there is a genuine recognition that we have a new set of problems, a new set of challenges. We need a new set of policies and leadership to things. I mean, it's amazing to me that we're finally talking about the importance of manufacturing employment. It's amazing that we're really speaking about the opioid problem as something that needs to be tackled, not just complained about. And so I think that, we still have the ability to make a difference in this country. But the first step is realizing the problems. And we've, I think, all begun to very seriously realize the problems. Again, that's the most important step, and that makes me very optimistic.
J.D. Vance, thank you for being a new voice in defense of life and liberty. Friends, when we come back, we're going to meet Karoline Leavitt. She is a young lady who is running for Congress from the state of New Hampshire. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Wherever you can find audio, you can find us. Follow us on your favorite platform. What a 5-star review. Help these conversations get the attention that they deserve. Let's do it together. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Stay with us. This is Jesuit Father Robert McTague, your daily host of the Catholic Current. Join me on Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern for Doubleheader. We'll be talking about campus coercion versus parental rights. We'll start with Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire, talking about the failures and hopes of higher education. Then we'll meet Larry Sands of the California Teachers Empowerment Network to talk about how parents can protect their children. That's Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern on the Catholic Current, coming to you from the Station of the Cross and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
This is the Catholic Current from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Catch up on an episode you've missed or share them with your family or friends. The Catholic Current is podcasted wherever you enjoy listening. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. We're talking about new voices for life and liberty. There are good folks of traditional values who've been fighting the good fight. They're tired. They're wondering, is there another generation coming up behind them to receive the torch and carry the cause of life and liberty forward? My guest today in the second half of the show wants to answer it with a resounding yes. She believes that politics is not yet too far gone. She grew up in Atkinson, New Hampshire. She worked in the Trump White House as assistant press secretary under Kayleigh McEnany. Later, she was communications director for Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Karoline Leavitt, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Thank you so much for having me this morning, Father. I'm excited to be with you to talk about these important issues.
Karoline, there are lots of good folks who are traditionally minded. They've been fighting the good fight for a long time. And they say, at least in terms of the political sphere, the good guys haven't been getting points on the board for a while. Some of them want to give up. What do you say to them?
We absolutely, as a country, especially as conservative Republicans, cannot give up. The future of our country is truly at stake. It's one of the many reasons that I decided personally to run for Congress. I felt compelled, both with my faith in God, but also just looking at the state of play in our current political system. And we are truly at the precipice, I believe, of going towards a socialist country that is teaching our children to hate our country, to not stand for our flag, truly to hate one another. It's a very divisive time. And so I just felt so compelled, especially as a young person, especially as a young conservative, to stand up and to fight. And I would encourage all of your listeners to do that as well, whether that means talking with folks in your community, whether it's your children, your grandchildren, your coworkers, your colleagues, your friends, whether that means running for school board or getting involved in your community at the local level. We as conservatives, unfortunately, have been pushed around by those on the left for far too long. We're seeing the disastrous effects of this presidency and this administration and Nancy Pelosi's regime down in Washington, D.C. in just 10 months. On every issue, our country is truly being destroyed. And so we cannot give up. I will tell you that I have been campaigning here in New Hampshire for 2 months, and people are very energized. And I would encourage all of your listeners to be energized as well. Don't turn the page. Allow everything that's happening in our country that is so egregious and so disheartening to really inspire you to want to make a positive change in your community, whether that means supporting candidates like myself that are running for office, or like I said, taking steps at the local level. We really are at a critical moment in history. But I will say the positive feedback I've received from my campaign is very, very encouraging. And I know that there's great candidates across the country like myself who want to stand for traditional values, conservatism, who believe America is the best country in the world. We're standing up to fight for that. And we need all hands on deck in order to win not only these elections, but truly save our country.
Karoline, going through your bio and looking at some of the photos that you posted, your background sounds like your family should be the subject of a Norman Rockwell painting. It's very wholesome. It's very traditional American that way. And it made me think, when I was a boy growing up, it was taken for granted that you would be patriotic, that you thought that there was something special about America and American history. Sure, there were flawed human beings, there were tragic mistakes, but there was something special, something distinctive. And when I see how kids are being raised now, America is presented consistently as the villain. You obviously didn't grow up that way. How has that affected your adult choices now?
My upbringing is absolutely everything to me. It is why I am running for Congress. It is why I'm a conservative. It's why I believe in the American dream, because my family lived it. As you mentioned, Father, my parents, neither of them went to college. They started our family business many years ago, and it has now grown to be a very successful family business right here in New Hampshire, in the district that I'm running in. I'm very proud of that. My parents were hell-bent on sending me to school to get a good education, and I'm very grateful to them every single day that they worked their butts off to send me to a Catholic high school in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Central Catholic High School was an incredible place. It taught me discipline. It brought me closer in my own relationship with God. And it also taught me about the importance of public service and giving back to your community. The community of Lawrence is it is very, very poor. There are a lot of families and young people, unfortunately, in that city who are going down a dark path, a divisive path. And so going to school at that and having a Catholic education really formed who I am. And then I went on later to continue that Catholic education through college. I'm very proud that I'm the first in my immediate family to receive an undergraduate degree, again, thanks to the hard work of my parents and my family. I went to St. Anselm College here in Manchester, New Hampshire, and those values of hard work, determination that were really ingrained in me from a young age, working at my family's business. We own an ice cream shop in my hometown of Atkinson, New Hampshire, and I went to work probably before I was legally allowed to, but that was the way I was raised. We, went to work every single day. You work hard, and nothing in this life is given. Everything needs to be earned. I was taught that very young, and those values were also really instilled in me and ingrained in me, but through my Catholic education, and I'm so grateful for it. But that is, again, why I'm a conservative, because I believe in keeping the government out of the people's business. Of course, less taxes, less regulation, all of those fiscal issues are incredibly important, and we're seeing the detrimental effects of the opposite agenda right now in Washington, D.C. But my family is everything to me, and no matter what happens, look, running for Congress is certainly not an easy feat. It is a challenge both physically, mentally, emotionally, every single day, especially in this divisive political climate. I have been attacked by just about everyone on the left already. In fact, next week, I am going to Dartmouth College to speak with students there, and there are leftists on campus who are already saying egregious things about myself and my colleague who is coming with me to speak. In fact, it is Congressman Madison Cawthorn from the great state of North Carolina. He is currently the youngest member of Congress, and he and I are going to go speak. And so this is, my point is, this is a challenge that I've thrown myself into, but my family is the bedrock of my life, as all families should continue to be the bedrock of society. And my faith in God carries me through. I wake up every day and say my prayers, ask God to give me the strength that I need to power through another day on a very difficult campaign trail. But again, it's an honor, and it's truly humbling, the support I've received from the people of my great home state. And largely they support my candidacy because they recognize that I am a homegrown individual who grew up in a family just like theirs here in New Hampshire, and I truly am fighting for them.
Friends, we're talking about New Voices for Life and Liberty. We're talking with Karoline Leavitt, who is now running for Congress in New Hampshire. Karoline, the Catholic Current has listeners all over the world. And yes, the majority of them, I would say, are going to be very sympathetic to the life issues. A lot of them come from Catholic backgrounds. What are your stand on the life issues, protection of the unborn specifically?
I am proudly pro-life, and I look forward to voting that way in Congress. I truly believe this is one of the pivotal issues facing our country and, quite frankly, our world. As you mentioned, I know you have a global audience here, and the issue of life is of the utmost importance. Look, it is very clear in our Constitution, right? Without the right to life, nothing else matters. And so as a young woman, I feel as though I'm in a very unique position to really message this issue in a way that resonates with young women across our country. We need to instill a culture that breathes and fosters and cares for life again, because unfortunately, again, the left has really owned the messaging on this issue. It is not about women's reproductive rights. It is not about women's health. It is about life and protecting that period. And as a woman, it is the most amazing thing that we can do to reproduce. That's why we're here. That's why, God made men and women, and it is so special. But unfortunately, our society, our culture does not view life in that way or the issue of abortion in that way. So I look forward to really talking about this issue with compassion, ensuring that we stand up for life. I will, of course, always vote that way in Congress. And I believe this is an issue that we have the ability to change hearts and minds. We just need to be more vocal about it, quite frankly. And again, win that messaging war, because unfortunately, we have lost it, particularly with my generation of young women and girls. If you look at any of the data or polling on this issue, they largely and overwhelmingly identify as pro-choice. But again, that doesn't discourage me. In fact, that encourages me and makes me want to step into this fight even more and always, of course, stand up for life.
Karoline, there are people who believe that all the amendments in the Constitution are ultimately protected by the Second Amendment. Can you speak to that, please?
Oh, of course. The Second Amendment is arguably the most important one. Look, the right to bear arms, our founding fathers knew, right? And if you look at the founding of our country, they knew that it was so incredibly important to give men and women alike the right to defend themselves from a government that just wants power. And that is what we're seeing right now in Washington, D.C. And this is not an extremist position. This is what's happening in our country. The federal government is overreaching and overstepping in every aspect of our lives. I think one of the silver linings of the COVID-19 pandemic was that people really woke up to just how far the government was willing to go to not only seize power, but to really just infringe on our freedoms. For instance, the fact that the government was telling businesses, small businesses like my own families, whether or not they could be open or stay open. And so when you give the government an inch, they will take a mile. And the right to defend ourselves and protect ourselves, that's what the Second Amendment is about, right? The government has no place to infringe on that. And gun control laws and gun control measures only infringe on the rights of law-abiding citizens. A criminal is going to get a gun whether or not there are strict gun laws or not, right? Look at all of our inner cities across this country that are just totally plagued by violence right now, and increasingly so. They have some of the strictest gun laws in the country. I'll use my home state of New Hampshire, where I'm running for Congress, as an example. We have very lenient gun control measures here. We actually have the highest capacity of gun ownership of any state in the country, and we historically have some of the lowest crime rates here in New Hampshire. When I lived in Washington, D.C., a city with some of the strictest gun control measures, there were shootings outside of my building on Capitol Hill near weekly. So the right to bear arms is so incredibly important, especially when we do have a federal government that is just looking to gain more power every step of the way. The federal vaccine mandate that President Biden just instituted is another example that comes to mind. It's egregious, it's un-American, it is unlawful. And so we're seeing these unconstitutional measures, if you will, every day. So ensuring that we're protecting the Second Amendment, oh my gosh, it's arguably more important right now than it ever has been in our country's history. I really believe that.
Well, I also think that there is a cautionary tale for those who aren't sure about the values of the Second Amendment. Watch some videos of police interacting with people in Australia, especially since the COVID interruption began, and understand that some 10, 15 years ago, Australian citizens surrendered all their firearms to the government. It just makes me wonder if the videos that we're seeing now of grandma being thrown to the ground and pepper spray because she doesn't want to wear a mask would have been different if the right to keep and bear arms was respected in Australia. It's not just for hunting and self-defense, it's also for protecting ourselves from tyranny. At least that's what I read when I read the Federalist Papers and scholars regarding the Second Amendment. Friends, when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Karoline Leavitt. We're talking about her campaign for Congress and being a new voice for liberty and life. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Be part of the conversation. Follow what we're following by following us on Gab. That's gab.com. Our channel is The Catholic Current. Everything you need to take this conversation to your family and friends, we give to you. Together, let's take it around the world. We can do it together. We cannot do it without you. Friends, we'll be back in just 2 minutes. Please do stay with us.
After today's broadcast, go to the Catholic Current show page on thestationofthecross.com for info on today's guests, the show resource links, and to sign up for our weekly email of upcoming shows.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. We're talking about new voices for life and liberty. And friends, you know my disclaimer when we talk about politics. I'm not a partisan. I'm not an advocate for any party or platform or candidate. Just want to have an intelligent conversation about important issues in light of the Catholic faith. Joining me is Karoline Leavitt, experienced hand in Washington, D.C., and now running for Congress in New Hampshire. Karoline, I myself spent some time in Washington, D.C. before I entered religious life. I know that politics can be a street ball. I know it can be all-consuming, even soul-eating. And very many people that I knew who were running for Congress were mentored by these words. Remember, your first priority in Congress is to get reelected. What's your first priority?
That is what they say, right? Well,
Yes,
I
it
will
is.
tell you that my first priority, in fact, is going to be co-sponsoring a constitutional amendment for term limits. I think it is one of the most important things that we need to pass. Our founding fathers, when they wrote our Constitution, which, by the way, is the best document in the history of the world. I know you know that, Father, but I just had to say it, that they did not intend, or I don't think that they ever predicted just how corrupt Washington, D.C. would become. You know, when they initially envisioned having members of Congress, it truly was public service. You go there from your home state, you go to Washington to serve your people, you return home. And of course, now we know lobbyists and special interest groups are so corrupting of our politicians in Washington. And I believe that term limits is a rightful, quite frankly, the only step we need to take, or we can take rather. And it would require a constitutional amendment to do it. But again, that is a piece of legislation I am both willing to co-sponsor and also hold myself to. And so in the first week of my campaign, I signed both of those pledges, both for myself and also to support that legislation. So that will most definitely be the first piece of legislation that I sign. And as a young candidate, I think it's very telling because there are a lot of young candidates like myself who are willing to say, yes, we need term limits. If you go down to Washington, D.C. on a time limit, not only are you more incentivized to get work done, but the lobbyists and the special interest groups don't have enough time to get to you, right? And so it's incredibly important that we get term limits done. I think it will make for a much more effective and, quite frankly, bipartisan environment in Washington, D.C., and it will also really hold public servants, myself included, accountable to only the people that they swore to represent.
Well, in my reading of American history, I would find it hard to believe that the Founding Fathers envisioned career politicians. It was just something you did as a public service, and then you went home and got on with your life. And the idea that you would spend decades or have no other job ever as an adult except be in politics, I'm pretty sure that's not what the American founders had in mind. Karoline, there are a lot of people who are exasperated with the political process, and especially when it comes to voting. And voting integrity is on the minds of a lot of people. And there are folks who believe the rot in the voting process is so far gone that there's no point in voting anymore. California has decided that mail-in ballots are absolutely here to stay. That has a lot of consequences. What's your campaign's position on voting integrity?
Well, we are pounding the pavement here in New Hampshire talking about that issue. In fact, I would argue I am the most outspoken candidate in this race on the issue of election integrity. And I will tell you, it is the number one issue on the minds of voters here in New Hampshire, and I know across the country, as you mentioned as well. And I get that all the time on the campaign trail. I'm out in a different town speaking with voters every single night, and they say, I love you so much. You are giving me so much hope. I'm so excited that you are a candidate in this race, but I fear that I don't even want to vote for you because I'm not sure that it matters. And I don't blame them for feeling that after what we witnessed in 2020. We saw a machine essentially take over our election system just months before in the guise of COVID-19, circumventing state legislatures, which is unconstitutional, and passing reforms such as the mail-in ballots, the absentee ballots, that really just led to chaos, confusion, irregularities, and quite frankly, fraud across our country. And so we have a lot of work to do to ensure the integrity of our elections and ensure ballot security. But that work does have to happen at the state level. And so I've been working with representatives here in the state of New Hampshire who are looking for tangible ways, tangible solutions that we have to pass before 2022, or quite frankly, nothing is going to matter. If nothing I do on this campaign trail will matter if we don't pass those reforms, such as here in New Hampshire, getting rid of same-day registration, ensuring that only residents of New Hampshire, not college students from Massachusetts or New York or other states surrounding our state, are voting in our elections, ensuring we're actually enforcing voter ID, getting rid of ballot harvesting. There's so much that needs to be done both here in my state, but also across the country. We have to get it done before 2022, and not only to ensure the integrity of our elections, but also, to your point, to reinvigorate the faith that voters have in our democratic process. Look, every communist country, socialist country across the world, what happens? The people lose faith in their democratic process, in their electoral system. And we are essentially at that point. It speaks to the first question you asked me, why are you getting involved? This is where we are as a country. Nearly half of our country doesn't believe in the sanctity of our elections. That is a major problem. I'm very committed to ensuring that we do restore election integrity. Again, it has to happen at the state level, but we talk about it on our campaign all of the time. We are so strong on that issue because it is arguably, again, the most important issue that we face right now as a nation.
Karoline, you could have done other things with your life. You're younger, educated, you've got a nice background, you've obviously got a lot of energy, and you've decided to step into the mosh pit of national politics, where already you've been slimed by the powers that be. We've got about a minute and a half left. Why do that? Why put yourself through that?
I ask myself that every day. No, I'm just kidding. I am doing this because I truly believe that we are at a pivotal moment, a pivotal time. My family, as we spoke about, was able to live the American dream because New Hampshire is arguably the best state in the country to start a business, to raise a family, And I want to protect that, not only for my generation, but for those that come after me. And seeing, I looked at every single exit poll from the 2020 election and seeing how the overwhelming majority of my generation voted in favor of policies that we know don't work, whether it's free healthcare, free taxes, or these folks in my generation believe in the culture wars that are just plaguing our country. They believe in cancel culture. They believe in stripping God from our lives, from our schools, from our everyday society. They don't believe in traditional values that really make this country great. And so I think the time is now to change minds, or we are going to continue moving down a very, very dark place in this country. I love America so much. I'm so grateful for my upbringing here. I've been so blessed to work at the highest levels of the federal government at a very young age, both in the West Wing of the White House for President Trump, and then also on Capitol Hill for Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of upstate New York. And so being down there, down in Washington, and seeing truly the war that's being waged against the American people, I just felt compelled. There's no other way to say it. Again, my faith in God played a very big role in my decision. I will say one of the first people I called aside from my family was my former boss at the White House, Kayleigh McEnany, who was the press secretary for President Trump. She is an amazing Christian woman who really brought me closer to God while I was working for her and on her team. And she just gave me the most inspirational words when I was deciding to make this decision. She said,
Karoline Leavitt, thank you for being a lively and uplifting guest. We'll be watching your campaign with interest.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
I'm Jesuit Father Robert McTague. You want to join us tomorrow? We're going to welcome back Michael Nose, and we're going to introduce Larry Sand, the California Teachers Empowerment Network. We're going to be talking about campus coercion versus parental rights. May mighty God bless you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Go in peace, and please pray for me.
Thank you for listening to this podcast brought to you by the stationofthecross.com, a listener-funded nonprofit organization. Please prayerfully consider donating at thestationofthecross.com by calling 1-877-888-6279 or through our free iCatholic Radio mobile app.